When people traditionally study ethics, they often tell you there are two major categories for doing ethics. There's ethics of deontology and ethics of teleology. Deontology means a duty-based ethic. There are things you've got to do, go do them. And an ethics of teleology is you got to figure out what you're trying to accomplish, then make sure that that happens. In other words, the ends justify the means. Now, given these two options, most Christians conclude, well, clearly we have to do an ethics of deontology. We've got these commandments we need to do. That's what we need to be focused on. But actually, traditionally, if you go back, there's another way of thinking about ethics, which has often been called virtue ethics. And virtue ethics is as old as Aristotle, which puts us way back before Christ. It's been around for a long time. But it kind of fell out of use and out of favor and kind of just disappeared during the time of the Enlightenment and just kind of was shunted away and lost. During the Middle Ages, it was quite popular. But then in 1984, a guy named Alistair McIntyre wrote a book called After Virtue, and he brought virtue right smack back into the spotlight with a rather significant book challenging the lack of morality and the lack of moral foundations in the contemporary world. And After Virtue does just this fantastic job of making us realize there's got to be something more as a foundation. Now, what McIntyre did then was essentially he sort of gave voice to a concern that was very widespread, and he became one of the sort of crystallizing moments in bringing a lot of these things to shape, and many others now have started to join in this kind of discussion, and it has been called corporately virtue ethics. So what virtue ethics is interested in doing is not so much thinking about what are the duties we're supposed to do or what are the ends we're trying to accomplish, as much as saying, what does it mean to be a person of virtuous character? And so virtue ethics is much more interested in not asking questions about, if you're in a tough situation, what should you do, as in, what kind of person are you in every situation? So virtue ethics is not interested in the overcrowded lifeboat scenario, for example. So you have a lifeboat which can handle 12, but you got 20 people shoved into this lifeboat. Who gets thrown overboard? Those are the kinds of questions that utilitarians ask. Those are the kinds of questions that deontological ethics tries to use this duty to figure out. But an ethics of virtue says we don't need to deal with these kinds of strange sorts of situations. We need instead to deal with the concrete realities of practical life, which is I'm faced with just mundane living. I'm faced with how to take care of family. I'm faced with how to deal with people at work. And how do I handle these situations? And virtue ethics says you handle those situations by being a person of character, by being a person of virtue. And we work on cultivating virtues. We work on cultivating character. So the character of the person becomes very important. Now, McIntyre also did a tremendous favor to the academic world and the world of ethics by introducing some key terms and bringing them back into the discussion. And three of these really critical terms for him are community, narrative, and practice. And you're going to be encountering those words quite a bit as you think about ethical issues, especially in the light of virtue ethics. Community deals with the group of people who are in agreement about what it is they're trying to accomplish. They agree on the purpose of life, the goal of what it means to be human and to be living, and they work together on these things. Obviously, the church is a pretty good example of a community. Narrative is the story of that community, the history of that community, the things that have gone on in the past, the things that are going to go on in the future, and just that story that is being told. The story of Scripture, God's work in God's world, is very much a narrative of our community of the church. And then this third term is practices. And practices are the rituals or the behaviors or the corporate group things that are done together which enhance the narrative and tell the narrative and retell it, shape and form habits into the people to form character, and help to form the community. So a practice, for example, in our context of the church would be worship itself, worship as a practice. Those three terms are kind of a critical part of the vocabulary and the lexicon of virtue ethics, and you should be a little bit familiar with some of those ideas to be able to appreciate a little more what's going on in virtue ethics. So that's the contemporary world of virtue ethics, just a quick overview, and it should help you to grasp a little better about what we mean by virtue ethics.